So Martin's giving the talk tonight, but everyone's just slightly looking at me, so I was going to say something anyway, actually. I always find it very interesting to hear what people say, particularly about any kind of struggles or things they've had to work with in their practice, in their life. And Martin has chosen to talk about fear in relation to Buddha's life and also, I think, in his own life. And Martin always comes across to me as very positive, very friendly, enthusiastic. He's got a very bright sort of energy, which suggests that maybe there's nothing holding back. But maybe we'll hear more about that. Okay, Martin.
Thanks, Bodhivajra. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Just realised this is a room full of mitras and order members. I think I'll start. This is just going to be quite a more informal talk. That's my excuse anyway. Recently, Dan and I are going to Spain, to Gukyaloka, hopefully to get ordained in April. And recently we had a gathering at Padmaloka of all the guys that are going to go on that retreat, apart from 4 guys from New Zealand and Australia who couldn't make that weekend at Padmaloka. And it was just good to meet everyone. It was really just good. It's sort of it's our band of brothers. But we all reported in about what we were going, how we were in terms of ordination and looking forward to it or whatever. And quite a lot of us, myself included, just said we felt quite anxious about it, or there was apprehension, a bit of nervousness. And one guy, when he reported in, he said he doesn't look forward to things. He generally doesn't look forward to things. He just gets anxious about them. Which really resonated with me. That's a familiar experience for me, and yet I thought that was bonkers. And sort of I just felt determined to turn that around. How unhealthy is that an approach to life, which is so short? Which brings me to the sutta that we listen to, the Fear and Dread or Fear and Terror sutta. And I just love that part when the Buddha says, what if on recognised designated nights, such as the 8th, 14th and 15th of the lunar fortnight, I were to stay in the sort of places that are awe-inspiring and make your hair stand on end, such as park shrines, forest shrines and tree shrines. Perhaps I would get to see that fear and terror. And to me, there's this like, what if I went to the woods where it's dark and scary and I got scared? It's like, I want that to be my attitude to the unknown, much more than what's going to happen. I just love that part of the story. It's like he's hungry for a deeper experience of, whatever this fear and dread thing is. I mean, that is also a label we put on things. I mean, what actually is fear and dread? So just before, what I'm mostly going to talk about my own experiences of fear and dread and anxiety and all those things. But I thought I'd like to just read another sutta or parts of a sutta that also touch on fear, not the Buddha's fear, but one of his lay disciples, Anathapindika, who I'm sure you've all heard of. He had Anathapindika's park. He was a very generous and very rich, at times very poor, benefactor of the Buddha. He was a lay follower. He wasn't a monk. But I just feel so inspired by his story. So I'm just going to read. I hope there's time for all this. So I'm just going to read. This is from the Sudatta Sutta. It's called the Sudatta Sutta because that was his real name. Anathapindika apparently means something like he who gives alms. Yeah, but Sudatta was his name, but nobody called him that, and I don't think anybody really knew that was his real name. Anyway, this is called the Sudatta Sutta. So, I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Rajagaha in the cool grove. Now at that time, Anathapindika, the householder, had arrived in Rajagaha on some business. He heard an awakened one, they say, has appeared in the world, and he wanted to go right then to see the Blessed One. Apparently his brother was hosting the Buddha and had told him, the awakened one's coming. And when Anathapindika heard those words, the awakened one, something awoke in him, and he just was determined to meet the Buddha. So yes, an awakened one, they say, has appeared in the world. Then the thought occurred to Anathapindika, today is not the proper time to go to see the Blessed One. Tomorrow I will go to see the Blessed One at the proper time. And with his mindfulness immersed in the awakened one, he lay down to sleep. 3 times he got up during the night thinking it was light. So he's very excited and possibly a little bit anxious as well. Then he went to so eventually he woke up, and it says here, then he went to the gate to the charnel ground. Non-human beings opened the gate. And then when Anathapindika, the householder, had left the city, the light vanished and darkness appeared. Fear, terror, and horripilation arose, and because of that he wanted to turn back. Then Shivaka, the Yaka spirit, invisible, proclaimed, 100,000 elephants, 100,000 horses, 100,000 mule-drawn carts, 100,000 maidens adorned with jewels and earrings aren't worth 1/16th part of one single step forward. Go forward, householder, go forward. Going forward is better for you, not turning back. The darkness vanished. The darkness then vanished for Anathapindika, and light appeared. The fear, terror, and horripilation he had felt subsided. And then for a second time and a third time, the light vanished and darkness appeared. Fear, terror, and horripilation arose, and because of that, Anathapindika wanted to turn back. Then, for a third time, Shivaka, the Yaka spirit, invisible, proclaimed, 100,000 elephants, 100,000 horses, 100,000 mule-drawn carts, 100,000 maidens adorned with jewels and earrings aren't worth 1/16th part of one step forward. Go forward, householder, go forward. Going forward is better for you than turning back. Then the darkness vanished for Anathapindika and the light appeared. The fear, terror, and horripilation he had felt subsided. So Anathapindika went to the cool grove. Now at that time the Blessed One, having got up as the night was ending, was pacing back and forth in the open air. He saw Anathapindika, the householder, coming from afar. On seeing him, he got down from his meditation path and sat on a seat made ready. As he was sitting there, he said to Anathapindika, "Come, Sudatta." Then Anathapindika, thinking, the Blessed One is calling me by my given name, threw himself down right there at the Blessed One's feet and said to him, "Lord, I hope the Blessed One has slept in ease." And then the Buddha says, always, always he sleeps in ease, the Brahmin totally unbound, who doesn't adhere to sensual pleasures, who's without acquisitions and cooled, having cut all ties and subdued fear in the heart. Calmed, he sleeps in ease, having reached peace of awareness. So it's interesting that Anathapindika just fell at the Buddha's feet. And apparently it's quite an Indian tradition to just ask how somebody is. Lord, I hope the Blessed One has slept at ease. And then the Buddha gives him this sort of a glimpse of the enlightened mind. The enlightened mind, of course, sleeps well. How could it not? Subdued fear in the heart calmed, he sleeps in ease, having reached peace of awareness. And what actually happens, so that's the end of that sort of book. What actually happens is the Buddha starts to teach Anathapindika, and he starts with kind of your basic stuff, but also very important and profound. He talks to him about giving, about virtue. He talks to him about the heavens, of the perils of vanity, and the defiling nature of sensual pleasures, and of the benefits of renunciation. I'll just read to you what it says here. So he's kind of just helping create the conditions in Anathapindika's mind. I think he knows Anathapindika's ready for a deeper teaching. So when the Blessed One saw that Anathapindika, the householder, was ready in heart and mind, pliable, unobstructed, uplifted and serene, he gave him the explanation of the teaching which is unique to the enlightened ones, the noble truth of suffering, its cause, its cessation, and the path. And with that, the pure eye of truth opened for Anathapindika. Whatever has arisen must also cease. Anathapindika, who had understood the truth of the teaching, had overcome all doubts and was without any wavering. He was certain in mind and relying on no one else in the Master's dispensation. In other words, he had achieved stream entry. So I just love that story because he wanted to turn back, and he just, he left home, went through the charnel ground, which is quite interesting in itself, and then darkness arose, and darkness in his heart arose, and he just really was serious about turning back, and it wasn't until this Yaksha spirit was kind of put things in perspective. So I just often feel very inspired by that, and sometimes when I feel a bit of fear, or I feel like, I don't dare do this or make this step, that thing comes to my mind, 100,000 elephants, horses, mule-drawn chariots, maidens, aren't worth a single step forward, aren't worth a 16th part of a single step forward. And I think that is, that's very true for our Dharma practice. I think I certainly I often don't realise quite how significant this thing is that we're taking part in. Anyway, I'll start my talk. I'll just talk about my own experience of turning towards fear. And I do think this is a life's practice. I think very much fear is the biggest thing. Anxiety, in a sense there's nothing really that bad with fear, it's just kind of how you respond to it. And I think I've in the past, it's really limited me, or I've let it really limit me, or out of habit I've just let it limit me. And certainly when I first came along to the Buddhist Centre, I was all over the place. I was quite an emotional mess, quite depressed, very anxious, very lost. And it, quite frankly, took about 10 years of Dharma practice for me to get anywhere near useful. And also, most of you probably know, I've had over the years this thing with energy, chronic fatigue thing, or a lack of energy, which these days I find quite bewildering. I just feel like quite a lot of energy, but I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And I think when I first started off, it was, and I began to learn about, these practices of being in the body and being embodied. It was alien to my experience. And when I started to practice, this basic foundation of mindfulness, the awareness of the body, and using the body to relax, which is what the Buddha taught as well. Using the breath to relax the body, and the body, and that relaxes the mind. this was it was new territory for me, and I knew I was out of my body. You say that to people that don't sort of do these practices, and they don't know really what you're saying, because it sounds a bit peculiar. But I felt actually I wasn't just out of my body, I was in orbit. I didn't, I thought, some people are quite out of their body and then maybe a few feet off the ground or something, not quite inhabiting their experience, but I did feel quite sort of set away from my body, and very frightened of sort of settling into it and sort of dropping into my experience. It almost, for a long time, a certain metaphor just would come to my mind. It was almost like life was this swimming pool, but I was just walking around the edge, sort of sometimes not even daring to dip my toe in the water. Just whereas all these people were in the water, swimming around, and I was, I felt very much sort of outside of the water, outside of life in some way. Quite early on, although I've been practicing with True Ratna for I first came to the Buddhist Centre about 17 years ago, and I've been practicing with True Ratna for quite some years. I was also interested in another teacher, a man called David Smith. Some of you will have heard of. An old name. He died a few years ago. He was more sort of Zen. His teaching was a bit more sort of Soto Zen. He actually wrote a book that Bhante encouraged to be published, and it was a very interesting book about his experiences of essentially becoming a stream entrant and then going beyond that, all while he was living in Sri Lanka as a monk. And I just found I was just very attracted to his teachings and just really, really enjoyed his teachings, and he had quite a fiery nature, which is sort of suited my temperament as well. So I was kind of interested in this guy, his teachings, but also I felt very drawn towards Bhante and Triratna, FWBO then, and I was a Mitra, and yet I was sort of also interested in these teachings of David Smith. And I remember it didn't feel a huge conflict. I felt I was getting something from both of them. And so for many years I was. I did my Mitra study, I had my friends here, but I had contact with David Smith, and I'd sometimes go on his days or his retreats and ask him questions. I could phone him up, as long as it wasn't during the football, it was fine. And he'd answer my Dharma question. So, but there came a point where it did become more of a conflict for me, actually. And I felt like in order to go deeper, I sort of had to choose one. And I remember one weekend I went to visit him in Birmingham, and that was when Bhante was also living in Birmingham at Majjhimaloka. So I arranged to visit both of them at different times. And I remember going to see David Smith one evening. We went for a curry and a beer, and the next day I had an appointment with Bhante in his room at Majjhimaloka. And I remember I said to David Smith, about this thing, I really like your teachings, but I'm really drawn to Sangharakshita and Triratna, and ibble, which one do I choose? Or I didn't even say which one do I choose. It was more like, look, I've got this tension. And David Smith just said, well, at some point you will have to decide. And when I went to see Sangharakshita, we talked about a few things, and I explained to this thing, I'm drawn to David Smith's teachings, but I'm also drawn to your teachings, blah, 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 blah. And he pretty much said, well, great, but, at one point you're going to have to decide. So I think I came home from Birmingham with a teaching of some kind. And it was interesting that I felt, although I just did still feel this conflict, and I couldn't see it resolving. And then I went in 2000 2010, I still hadn't asked for ordination. In 2010, I went on a retreat to Vajraloka that Tejananda was leading. Or a couple of years before, I'd been on a very good retreat by David Smith at Vajraloka. So that really inspired me. So here I was on this Tejananda retreat. Tejananda, if you don't know, is this great teacher who lives at Taraloka. Sorry, Vajraloka. He doesn't. Thank you. That's good. Some people are listening. And it was interesting because I was just comparing it to David Smith's approach. So, and essentially my story in my mind for the first few days of this retreat was, this is great. Tejananda's good. He's all right. He's good. But he doesn't do it like Smith. So that was, Tejananda's, he's good, but Smith does this, and then he does this, and which Tejananda doesn't do, and I was just comparing them both, and then it just occurred to me, it's like, I'm scared. I was using this little kind of comparison game I was playing to not engage in the retreat, and when I kind of just saw that, and I realised, God, what's really going on is I fear engaging with this retreat. I just determined that, first I'll engage with the retreat, and then I'll have this chat with myself, and because I realised, oh wow, this fear was manifesting as this sort of rationalisation for comparing them both, which wasn't getting me deeper into either of their teachings. And so I decided, no, right, you just got to go for this, and I just engaged with the retreat as wholeheartedly as I could. And funnily enough, that the comparisons just disappeared. It was utterly irrelevant. It was a great retreat. So that was quite a strong experience for me. And I did feel also, after I'd let go of that, there was something about the retreat that I felt. At the time I thought, gosh, this Tejananda, he's got something that I felt only David Smith had. Because I always felt David Smith had something that I couldn't quite find in Sri Ratna. And yet suddenly here it was at Vajraloka, and I didn't need to go to David Smith to get this, whatever this thing was, this extra something I felt that was missing. And that, among other things, that made me ask for ordination, because I felt, gosh, Sri Ratna's got what I want, what I'm looking for, sort of something that I'm yearning for. Sri Ratna can help sort of meet that yearning, if you like. So I asked for ordination. I went on my first GFR retreat at Pamaloka. This is in 2010, and as soon as I was on the GFR retreat, I'll backtrack a bit. It wasn't so much that I thought Sri Ratna had something. I felt very much that Tejananda had something. And because he was part of Sri Ratna, then therefore Sri Ratna had something. And when I went to, I do think Tejananda has got something. He's a very good teacher. When I got to Padmaloka and just sort of threw myself into the retreat, it was almost like I just dropped all of that. It wasn't, I couldn't no longer say only Tejananda had this thing in the mountains far away in Wales. It was like, it was this thing that I was deeply yearning for was just, coming out of the walls at Padmaloka. The place was just full of it. I just felt it just answered all my I can only really describe it as kind of my deepest desires, as far as I was, I get glimpses of them, and I get glimpses of sometimes what can meet those desires. And on that retreat I just felt, there it was, Pamaloka, 9 miles away. I'd gone all the way to see David Smith because I was convinced only he had it. And I'd also created this thing, I think, in Tejananda. I think Tejananda's brilliant, but I realised as part of this the sort of mystery that is the Triratna Buddhist order. But I kind of saw that just only he could give me something that I realised actually is much more available to me. And I'm aware I might be speaking a bit vaguely. What is this thing that is available to me? And I'm not really sure I can say exactly what it is, but I remember having a sense some years later at Padmaloka. I went and I remember I was just weeping all the time. I got to Padmaloka and I just was overwhelmed. And I just had a very strong sense. I was in the garden and just kind of looking at this place, nice English garden, well kept, and nice English old houses and a new bit, and it's just kind of nice buildings. But to me, there was this something. It was another realm as well. It was so much more than those things, and I felt very much that the gate was wide open, and it was just entirely up to me to step through it if I wanted to. It was like I couldn't ask for anything more, and it was in my hands to make the move. Anyway, I hope that's not too vague. So I'll move on. So in my little kind of personal story, I feel Tejananda weaned me off David Smith, and then I guess Padmaloka or Triratna as a whole sort of weaned me off Tejananda in a narrow sense, if that makes sense. I don't want to diss Tejananda. I think he's a great teacher, but my kind of projections onto him as like the only one that can show, that has got the answers. That was no longer tenable. So anyway, in 2010, I'd asked for ordination, but interestingly enough, on that very retreat that I just mentioned, I got very ill and had a massive relapse in my ME that lasted quite a few years. And shortly after that, a few months later, I decided I need to focus on getting better, and I withdrew my request for ordination. So, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, so what was going on there? I sort of glimpsed something, and withdrew. And I do feel very much it was fear. Although I think at the time there were no other options really. I felt I did the best I could at that time, and I did, I don't regret sort of withdrawing. In a sense, in those few years when I was quite unwell, there were a couple of things I did do that were very important. There was one relationship I was in with a girl that I felt was just gave me an opportunity to really sort of face some fears around sexual relationships and commitment and relationships with women. So I felt there was something very useful happened in that time. I didn't just withdraw and do nothing. And also I had a period away from my family. I won't go into it now, but I felt I just needed some space from my family for about 6 months. My mum, my dad, my sister, just to get my bearings. And I do feel that was a very, very important time in my life, and it felt like very much that I was leaving home for the first time, even though I was late 30s. A kind of a going forth. And then after I'd done that, I'll come back to that in a moment. So this fear. What was this fear? And it felt very tied in with my illness as well. What's going on there? This sort of mysterious thing that prevents me from living the life that I love. And I mean, one way I understand it more, this definitely feels true for me, that it's a fear of my own confidence. There's a teacher at Pamaloka, Satyaraja, and I was telling him about, about this and about he'd seen me sort of relapse and things like that, and he just said to me, "You fear your own energy, don't you?" And that was just a very, very, well, I thought very insightful of him, and that felt very, very true. And I feel it's like in me, I do feel I've got a lot of energy and passion. And certainly now more and more, I feel I suppress it less. But I think in the past, I was quite frightened of it. And I do feel, I love this image that's come to mind recently of, Scoby Doo and Scrappy Doo. It's like I've got this inner Scoby Doo and Scrappy Doo dynamic. So there's a part of me that's just like, let me at him, and just wants to get out there and puppy power. And then there's a part of me that's like, no, Scrappy, and doesn't want to do that. And but I think my inner Scooby Doo has had in the past been the dominating force, and I really listen to Scoob, yeah, it's interesting. But now I feel much more. No, hang on. I want a bit of a fight, and I want to get out there, and I want to live, and I want to be cheeky and playful and provocative, and because that's my energy. And I think in the past I've almost felt sort of apologetic for it, or knowing it can sometimes come out as sort of arrogance. I've thought, no, better not be like that because that's all arrogance or something like that. But actually, very strong part of my my being is this sort of fiery energy. Which is why I passed that picture around, probably still downstairs, that painting of by Simone Martini of the Annunciation. I think that's a slightly more, if you like, transcendental version of the Scoby Doo Scrappy Doo dynamic. So you've got the angel who knows what's going on, and he's saying, oh, by the way, don't take this literally, I know this is a Christian story, but I think if we don't take these stories literally, they're very, there's some deep truths in them. So you've got this angel Gabriel coming to visit Mary. He knows the truth. He knows what's going to happen, utter confidence. And that angel was so fiery, and these words of gold coming out of his mouth, Hail Mary, full of grace. And, and his just utter intensity of, his stare at Mary. And you saw Mary just like cower. She's like, you've got the wrong Mary. She's got a book reading the scriptures. She wants to be, be a good, read her thing and do her spiritual practice. She does this, but you've got the wrong Mary. And I love that painting. It's so. I think that illustrates that dynamic as well. And I recognise both those parts of myself. I'm not even sure if the angel represents a part of myself or something deeper than that, but I certainly, that Mary in blue, sort of all cowering in the corner, I can relate to that posture. It's by Simone Martini, that painting, The Annunciation. It's in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. I have not seen it, but I'd love to see it. And so, anyway, in 2014, I asked for ordination again. Quite a few things came together for that to happen. One was just a growing confidence in myself and in Sri Ratna. So it wasn't just, I just had a growing confidence in Sri Ratna and in myself that I didn't quite feel the first time I asked. And the second time when I asked for ordination, I felt so much more of me was behind the request. And I knew it was going to be the last time I'd asked for ordination. I just knew that. It was funny, it came just after I'd done a Padmasambhava weekend retreat in the Polish mountains. And I spent a bit of time in Poland connecting with the Polish Sangha, which I have sort of a connection with. And I remember coming back on the plane in a very sort of elevated inspired state of mind, and just thinking, I had these two truths in my mind. One, I love Poland. One, I love the Dharma. And it just seemed to me logical, therefore, to ask for ordination. So I did. But there were many other things, other conditions that gave me the confidence to do that. But so much more of me was behind that decision. Still, I went on GFR retreats and had little relapses. Yeah, I once went on one retreat and spent the whole retreat in bed. And Satyaraja said to me, look, keep coming to Pamaloka and keep looking at this thing. So that kind of, coming back to the Buddha, who's like, he wants to look at fear, what's going on, what those lines again. What if, I were to stay in these sort of places that are awe-inspiring, make your hair stand on end, perhaps I would get to see that fear and terror. So, what if I were to go to Padmaloka where my hair stands on end, or my body freezes and all my energy disappears? Maybe I'd then be able to see that fear and terror. So it was very good to do that. I don't really have time to go into this, but Amrita was also very helpful. He taught me a technique called the lightening process that helps deal with, I think, confidence, actually. Not deal with confidence. Confidence isn't the problem. I do think it's a fear of confidence that's the problem. And this technique that Amrita showed me, that's particularly good for people with chronic fatigue, made me just see my whole practice in a different light. It made me see the metta bhavana in a different light, and sort of opened up my practice. It's almost like, I've already got this therapy technique. I just haven't seen it. It's like, it's here. This is it. That was another factor that sort of helped sort of undermine this lack of confidence. So I kept on going back to Pamaloka, and sometimes this, I'd get tired and I'd have to rest, but I was kind of more and more interested in what was going on, and just turning towards, and it was very much a physical thing. I used to think, I've just got to rest and rest and rest. What I really needed to do was relax, not so much rest, and relax into the body. And it felt often I'd go to Pamaloka, like, here's me, and here would be my confidence. I'd have this little bit of confidence, and the rest of me was just really frightened. And then I'd just kind of get paralysed by my fear. It wasn't obvious that that's what was happening. But then when I relaxed, I realised, I've only got this little bit of confidence. Actually, I'm really, really frightened. When I sort of began to feel that fear, actually I almost realised it wasn't as big as I thought it was. And when I was in touch with it, then my energy would return. It was a bizarre thing. And I don't think I'm over my relationship with the sort of lack of energy yet, but I do feel it's very much tied up with kind of a fear of confidence. Again, a fear of my own confidence. I was also just thinking now in the puja, as your mind sort of gets distracted a bit, how I have a fear of renunciation. I almost see that as a sort of, I don't want to renounce anything. But it just occurred to me that, but if I let go, then I can play more. And if I let go of these comforts and these securities that are false refuges anyway, I'll be much more relaxed, and I'll find that my own confidence, and I'll be able to play more. And that's in a sense all I want to do. I just want to play, and I do feel play needs to be a very needs to have quite a central role in my life, I think, and in my Dharma practice. And I think if it doesn't, things dry up quite quickly. And I think that's another thing I sort of suppressed and was almost sort of frightened of. It was this, my very playful sort of nature. I almost sort of told myself it wasn't Buddhist or something like that. Or, yeah. And one of the things recently, as we're approaching the ordination retreat, that I've kind of thought, well, how do I prepare? How do I prepare? And again, it's letting go. It's not really doing anything. Everything's in place. I've got, all the conditions are in place, friendships and if you like, the institutions. I work here at the centre, but I'm very, my Dharma practice has got a good momentum. And I feel very much what I need to be doing at the moment, if anything, is just letting go. And if you like, just letting myself play with what is already happening. And I don't mean, when I say play, I don't mean in a facetious way. I just mean in a kind of a healthy, childlike exploration. And after we went on this weekend retreat where we met all the guys that are getting ordained, I came home and I kind of thought, why am I doing this? It wasn't a crisis of confidence or anything like that, but I just thought, yeah, it might be a good idea to ask that question actually. Why am I doing all of this? And I didn't have an answer. I mean, I could give you a clever answer that was, the textbook answer of why I practice the Dharma, but I didn't really have an answer. But that felt okay, and I just wanted to be open to, ask myself deeply, why am I doing this? Why do I want to join the Triratna Buddhist order? Why do I want to get ordained? Why do I even want to practice the Dharma? I mean, it doesn't take a few days of watching the news or just being around, bumping into a few mad people in the city, and you've got your answer. But another thing that another kind of answer that came was recently Vajragupta asked on the Parinirvana day. We had these workshops, and I've forgotten exactly what she said, but something along the line of, what is your heart's deepest wish? What do you, I don't know if that's from Shenpen Huken, that sort of approach, I'm guessing, I don't know. But I've heard that kind of question before, what do you deeply desire? Just getting in touch with what is it you deeply desire. And what sort of just came to me was that actually it was quite simple to love deeply. And by that I mean not just people, but just to live my life as just as wholeheartedly as I can. I feel I've got a lot of passion, and I sort of which can go in funny directions, but I think I just want to sort of embrace life, and I do feel I've got, like I told you about that swimming pool analogy, I still feel, certainly, I'm not walking around the edge anymore, but I feel like I'm not quite in the water. And there's a bit of me holding back, and I do feel in sort of throughout my day, whatever I'm doing, I'm not quite doing. I'm sort of safely just somehow distant from it, in a kind of I don't know. And I feel restless and all this, but I think actually that's a fear of just, do I dare just live? And I think to love is to kind of to see. I think metta is really about, not just about sending rainbow love to people or whatever, or bright light or anything. It's even wishing people well. It's like, well, who are we wishing well anyway, and who's doing the wishing? There's something very profound about going on that I'm kind of not letting myself see. So I think the practice of metta is very much just an opening towards people, and the same with art. Actually, I like looking at art, and I've realised when I look at art, it's quite simple. What I've got to do is just look, and then drop my story, because there'll be some story, there'll be a fancy thing that I can tell my friends about this piece of art when I get home. It's just like drop the cleverness and look again, and then the more story comes, and then just look again and stop thinking you know this thing, or let go of thinking you know what you're looking at, and just look again. And I think it's exactly the same with people. I think that to me is what metta is. It's like, look, drop the story and relax, and then you get a more of a glimpse of the mystery. And I think then that's the territory where metta becomes insight, or moves in the direction of insight. This fixed self, this self dissolves. That self out there that you're looking at, you can't. It's not sustainable. And this self that's supposedly looking at that self is also not sustainable. So I think, I think at that point we're really sort of beginning to enter into that greater mystery. We've gone from fear to love. So I'll end there. Thank you.